Well, good afternoon, everyone. Happy Wednesday to you all. Thank you for taking the time to listen in on our midweek Hebrew word study. We're continuing in the book of Daniel, chapter 6. And as I hope you can see on your screen, we're looking at the Jewish International or Jewish Bible. And they have their commentary, the Hebrew on the right side, the English on the left. And picking up from where we left off last week, as we closed out chapter 5, we see that Daniel was, called in to interpret the handwriting on the wall. And during the middle of the night, the Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was slain. Just a stark, you know, sentence here. Um, as Daniel knew this was going to happen, part of the earlier dream that he interpreted of the kingdoms changing and going from the um, Babylonians to the Medes and the Persians. What we struggle here to find out is as we look at the transition from the Babylonians to the Medes and the Persians, we see here, starting chapter 6, it just says Darius the Mede received the kingdom, and it gives his age at 62 years old. Now, here's where it's just kind of strange as we look to the Jewish sages say that it's difficult to identify these historical figures. And of course, there's Darius, there's Cyrus. The name Cyrus has been in the news, tied in with our political things going on as a reference, but yet it's very difficult to understand their positions here. And the Jewish commentary goes through a entire outline of trying to identify these Persian kings and the Medes and the kings who went where and how do they really fit in. Um, so very interesting, and we just got to roll with it. Our purpose here is not to historically uh, satisfy all of our curiosities, but basically to look at, a couple things that what's happening. What is Daniel like? What do we learn about Daniel? What do we learn about the government at that time being headed up by Darius here? And so these are the things that kind of relate to us as to helping us learn maybe is there something for us to learn here about how we behave, in similar situations. So you're in a country, as Daniel is, where the government is not favorable to you. You're being in it, you're part of it, but how do you be in something but not of something? And Jesus challenged this with that in his ministry to be in the world but not of the world. And so that's kind of my focus as I'm going through this, and the comments that I make will be based upon that thought. So as we look at this, Darius became king, and it pleased Darius to change the government. He wanted to set up in this kingdom 120 satraps, which are like provinces, governors, who should therefore rule the whole kingdom. And over those 120, he set three presidents, of whom Daniel was one. If you remember back in the previous chapter, King Belshazzar said whoever interpreted the dream would be one of three. So, how does that play into this? The Daniel was one. There were two other presidents, and this will come into play as we, go through the rest of the story, which is obviously being set up to tell us about how Daniel gets in the lion's den. We'll go through this first half today, just setting that base understanding, saying, well, how did this happen? What led to him being thrown in the lion's den? So here's something that to me is where the beauty of this comes in as we, wonder why Daniel stood out. It says here in verse 4 that Daniel distinguished himself above the other presidents and the satraps, and he had a surpassing spirit in him. And the king really was impressed and wanted to set him over the whole realm. Well, he had two other people in this these two other presidents, and they obviously saw what was going on. And it didn't take long for jealousy to set in because verse 5 says these other presidents didn't like this. They didn't want to be pushed aside. They didn't want to play second fiddle to Daniel. And so let's look down at what it says about verse 3 and 4 in the commentary. Um, Talks about the satraps, the accounts, and then it talks about how did Daniel distinguish himself. And we'll look at this word a little bit further, but the base understanding is that it means to shine or to be illustrious. Think about that in a presence of someone. Have you ever come into a room and you interacting with people and you meet people that just seem to shine? Obviously there's a whole type of dynamics that goes on when you're in a crowd of people. You have those that are somewhat the center of attention. You have those that are loud, those that are joking, those that attract a crowd. I don't know if Daniel fit that. It says he distinguished himself or he shone. He had a presence about him when he came into the room that you weren't attracted to him because of his charisma, but I believe this part here where it said he had a surpassing spirit, it was God's presence upon him that made him become a person that people wanted to be around. But maybe not everybody, because in verse 5 it said the two other presidents sought to find something against Daniel as touching the kingdom, meaning, they want to find fault in him. Did he take bribes? Did he, promote people unfairly? Was he easily swayed and showed preference? And they said, no, they couldn't find any occasion for fault. He didn't, never told any lies, never stretched the truth, never misquoted figures. All the things that, of course, politics is being what it is, and we hear so much that it's easy to find fault with any politician because there's just so many words that are going out about. There's records that you can examine, and one will point to it and say, they're doing wrong. The next one will point to a different record and say they're doing great. But here, it's so beautiful to see that these guys who hated Daniel, who wanted to get rid of him under such close scrutiny, couldn't find any occasion nor any fault, and he was faithful. And it says there was no error or fault found in him. I couldn't think of a better epithet. You're looking for something to put on your tombstone. This would be what I'd want to have put on mine. Just a great thing to have people saying this about you, especially your enemies. And these men in verse 6 say, we couldn't find anything against Daniel except in the matter of his God. So this is telling you that these other two presidents were not on the same page as far as serving or acknowledging Daniel's God. Um, I don't know where they were when Nebuchadnezzar went through his thing. I don't know where they were when Belshazzar and the handwriting on the wall occurred and Daniel told this all. You know, how much time had passed. We know Daniel is fairly old from the previous chapter. It was estimated that he's about 80 years old. So he's obviously older. We don't know how much time has passed since um, King Darius set this all up. And now they find occasion against him. Obviously, it could be years. And Daniel could be 85, 90, we just don't know. But against this, they only know that he served his God different than the way they served their gods or didn't serve any of the gods of the Babylonians or the Medes and Persians. So these presidents, and of course the satraps were the 120 um, tribes or whatever underneath them, were obviously influenced by these presidents. And so what I wonder is if Daniel's group, because he had some, um, what did they do? Why didn't they rally around him? Were they happy or did they not know what was going on? So with these two other presidents and their groups that supported them came to King Darius and did all they could to butter him up, conspiring against Daniel. And it says that they really laid it on thick, I guess. Live forever. That's what a king wants to hear. We'll be loyal to you. All those things that people in high positions who are used to everyone fawning over them love to hear all of these wonderful things and love to have everybody do exactly what they say. That's how kingdoms work. And in a human state anyway. So they came to him, they consulted together, and I don't know how long it took, but obviously they had a big group of people here trying to come up with a scheme that they could throw upon Daniel. And so they said, we're going to suggest, King, that you make a statute, a strong interdict, which, like an edict, that anyone who asks any petition of anybody, any god or man, for 30 days, except that you, king, shall be cast into a den of lions. Now, again, how many questions get asked of people in a month's period of time in thousands of different aspects? So again, this is a very vague. The king should have been smart enough, but it kind of shows me that he was so full of himself and so into himself and just reveling in the buttering up and fawning of these other people that he wasn't listening, didn't have any good decision making on this. And, you know, that's very, very interesting. And then, of course, it talks about being cast into a den of lions. Historians here and the Hebrew commentators said that the Persians are known to have inherited this practice from the Assyrian kings, that they would keep animals in their zoological gardens. Um, this changes the thought that maybe I had of a lion's den and the den of lions. As you know, I've been taught since a child and I've heard this story. I kind of pictured it previously more like the gladiators in the Roman Colosseum, where, they used these for sport. And, every weekend, they didn't have football, basketball, baseball. So they went and watched these gladiators fight the lions. And um, maybe that only came in later on with the advent of the Roman government. But here they're saying that these lions were kept like a zoo, and they had a cage, kept them in their zoo. The king, and his family would go and watch them, and it's different understanding than what I previously had before. So he says, let the king sign this law. And of course, it can't be changed because of the laws of the Medes and the Persians, which altereth not. Again, that's another kind of foolish thing, because who is ever perfect, creating something that can't be changed or altered? But again, it shows you what their country was like, what the social system and the governmental system was like, ruled in ways that don't always make sense, ruled in ways that don't always favor the common person, the average person, the ones who are doing all of the work. That these were not set up to favor them. It was set up to favor the king and those that were fortunate enough to be part of his group. So the king signed the edict, and it's in writing, all signed, sealed, and delivered. And of course, Daniel was not part of this, but yet somehow it says that he knew that the writing was signed, and he knew what it implied. But yet, looking at the character of Daniel and what age he was, he felt knowing he's in his 80s at least didn't seem to matter to him. His mind was made up. His life was filled with God's presence. And so he was going to do the same thing he's always done and not be deterred by those people. Um, Interesting that he wasn't there to challenge this. Obviously, between verse 10 and verse 11, Daniel got wind of this. Somebody knew it would affect him. And, but yet he didn't go running to the king saying, okay, my prayer time's coming up at 3 o'clock. What's going on, king? How do I get a workaround? Can you write a addendum to this and give me a protection clause and because this will mean death for me because obviously the king favored him. He was going to make him number two in the whole kingdom, and he would have never signed this if he knew what this might have for Daniel. So there's just a lot of things going on here. And, obviously we know the end of the story. We know God protects Daniel. And could this whole story just be part of God's plan or purpose so that we could see what someone who lives for God and trusts in God, um, how his life should go, how his um, where his trust should be, not in his ability to go to the king and have the law changed, or not in his own figuring that he could have decided to go on a business trip, hop on his entourage and go out of town for 30 days. And then also, what about all the other people? What about all the other Jewish people that were there? This would have to affect him also, them also. What about all the other pagan cultures that are there? So all of the other temples to all these other gods, did they just kind of shut down for the month? What about all the priests and so forth from all these other pagan deities that were in force? Um, we don't hear anything about them. So it's just interesting questions, pondering what is going on. Obviously, the moral of the story here is to be focused on Daniel, on the one true God, and to learn from that. So we see that Daniel went into his house, his windows were open to the upper chamber, and he kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day as he's facing Jerusalem. This is something kind of interesting. I don't always associate this practice with Jewish worship. I'm normally associated with and again, I don't know a lot about Islam and other Middle Eastern religions, but I do know that at least Islam will face towards Mecca when they do their prayer. I have learned, though, that Jewish synagogues definitely normally will have their front of the synagogue where the rabbi would stand and the cantor would stand, and then behind them are where they keep the Torah scrolls, that those traditionally face east, at least in the United States, because they are facing towards Jerusalem. I just learned that a little while ago. Thought I would pass that on, but it definitely fits in this realm here of Daniel um, facing towards Jerusalem. And so it said he kneeled and he prayed and gave thanks before God, just like he did 3 times a day, every day, for years and years and years, which became his practice and his lifestyle. Obviously, they had their binoculars and they were watching. And once they saw him do that, it says they came tumultuously and found Daniel in his prayer before his God. Um, that's just incredible that they would be watching and looking at it in such a way. What I want to do is just take a look at a couple words before we run out of time here. And we see that uh, there's a couple words that are just very interesting. In verse 3, it was the word about Daniel being distinguished. And so it says that he distinguished himself. It's this word that's signified by 5330. And we see here that it's the word natsach, which means to become chief. And the word Natsak, I love that Bible Hub talks about the usage and this cultural historical background. It conveys the idea of a long time of being in a relationship that is not short term, but one that will last forever, perpetuity or eternity. And it's being in this splendor. Interesting how that is tied to becoming chief. That's kind of a stretch for me. So it's just interesting as I think of this now, knowing that Daniel had this shiningness to him, this illumination, this radiance that would be aligned with the word for splendor, would have maybe be with aligned for eternity, and it caused him to rise above, be the cream of the crop, if you will. And so that was an interesting one. And it said that he had an excellent spirit, which is the word Yatira 3493. And it says that this is a surpassing spirit. The other thing that's interesting to note is when you're translating, there are words that do not have direct equivalents. And I like that the Hebrew lexicon here points this out. And of course, this is making reference to Greek. We're looking at Aramaic words, but it just helps me become a little bit more reinforced that let's not get so I shouldn't get so hung up over a word, how it exists in English, because the English word may not be a direct 100% translation of what the original word was, because that varies, doesn't happen in all instances. So here they have this word yatir, which is an excellent, surpassing, preeminent spirit, something that's just superior and surpassing in quality and value. And that was valued in the Eastern cultural backgrounds, that people who were in authority would have an excellent spirit about them, and you would just admire them and want to serve them, want to work for them because they had an excellent spirit. They weren't trying to trick you or manipulate you or lord over you like I'm sure many of them do. And obviously the king shows that type of spirit. And these other governors, obviously, the other two had that type of spirit, which made it easy for Daniel to shine. And so that's where we're going to stop today. I trust you enjoyed this study. Again, it challenges me to be a light, as Jesus said, in a lost and a dark world, and let our light so shine before men. I see so many comparisons and um, references here that admonish me to strive. I'm sure we'll never get there, but to be just what like Daniel was in the midst of his dark world, to be a light that shines so that when people, as the song goes, see you, they see me, that they see more than maybe what I see in the mirror, but they see Jesus in me. You know, there's a song that says, let them see you in me, let them hear you when I speak, let them feel you when they're around me, let them see you in me. So let that be our thought for this time, and God bless you, and see you next week. Bye bye.